and we are back for another episode on StackedCast. In this episode, we'll be talking about our favorite topic, which is movement and the influence of movement on technique. Uh, you guys have probably heard this before. I forgot how to lift. I forgot how to squat. I forgot how to bench. I forgot how to deadlift. What does that even mean? How do you get to a point where you forget how to do a lift that you've been doing for years on end? How do people get to a point where they forget how to squat? It's something I've experienced multiple times, and I think in my last prep for the Arnold or the Pro whatever, I think I figured out where that comes from for me, and I'm sure there are other reasons why people forget, like quote unquote, forget how to lift, but this is something I think that can apply to a lot of people, but it's not really talked about a lot. And the main idea here is we all know how to squat. You get to a point, your technique is good, like you know how to squat. You're not gonna forget, but there are drivers that push you away from that sweet spot. There is a specific technique that works really well for you, and you feel that's a technique that clicks. Like that's a strong technique for you. We'll call that like the sweet spot, right? What are some drivers that push us away from that? And that's when we go into movement variability. David, do you can want to go over like what movement variability actually means?
Yeah, I mean, movement variability is pretty much the fact that, we all organize our bodies a certain way under a load, depends on our past, depends on, like, it also depends, I would say, I think the biggest thing is how much actual skill practice you're getting during the week. I think that for example, when you get too many accessories or you get too many actual variabilities in the program, say like for example, I actually did this to myself not too long ago. I made the decision to add a leg press into my program, and it caused kind of almost a stir in how I was squatting because of the bias that it shifted me a certain way that I wasn't very used to, squatting. So I came into that following squat day having done a movement that was almost too far off the other end to how I was comfortable. So I had something that was going well for me, for example, and then I almost went too far off the other spectrum into like really driving my knees forward, for example, whereas my squat is really wide and it doesn't really operate that way. I almost went too far the other end, and I started driving my knees forward on accident on my squat, and it threw me off pretty bad. It actually had the opposite effect. I would go down, and then it would shift me back on my heels because of how much I was driving down into my knees. And it was, long story short, it did feel like I indeed forgot how to lift. And I tackled it pretty quickly because I was like, what did I even change about this situation? And it was like just simply doing, something that was away from the specific bias that I had. So, long story short, movement variability occurs when you have a comfortability of sorts, like with your lifts, like you're like, I move it a certain way, and then something comes in or something changes and says, okay, like for example, an accessory or for example, say I did a stance change or something comes in and says, we're now going to move this way. And then you come predisposed into the next session in a different way. Your orientation, all of these things are now different, but yet I'm still trying to squat the same way I did last time, right? And as we talked about in the last episode, things don't simply, change. So how did I just randomly forget how to lift? Why am I all of a sudden shifting so far back on my heels whenever I'm coming out of the squat? Why is this occurring, right?
Yeah, and I think just to try to simplify it for people listening here, so the way I look at movement variability is the deviation between rep and rep, we have like a rep that's closer to midfoot, one rep that's closer to the heel. Not every rep is going to look the same, and you have also not every set is going to look the same. So there is deviation, and like that deviation from rep to rep or set to set, that is movement variability. We don't squat on a Smith machine that every rep is going to look the same. We have a lot of demands of managing center of mass, managing our skeleton position, and with variations of loads, and I guess like also like there's a lot of variables that go into it. But if you squat on a different bar, if you squat on a different rack or whatever it is, if the pad is a little bit more sticky, the reps are gonna look different, which means that like that is movement variability. Reps are not gonna look exactly the same, and it might be like a small deviation from rep to rep, or it can be for someone who is newer to the sport and can't really manage their center of mass. Well, you're gonna see a huge deviation. One rep will be all the way on their heels. The other rep will be like almost falling on their face. But there is, even for someone who is advanced, even if you look at the bar path, not every rep is going to look exactly the same. Some reps might actually be very close, but rarely you see that. And if there is no deviation at all, you don't even have to worry about forgetting how to lift because everything looks the same. But again, that's not the case for everyone. So the way I I guess put movement variability, I put it into two buckets. One that is, like I mentioned, a newer lifter who has skill issues. They don't know how to manage the center of mass. And like the biggest driver here is center of mass, I would say. There is like direct center of mass management variability. I don't know like how I would, like I don't know if I can put a label on it, but we can look at if you've seen those videos of people squatting or deadlifting and they have the bar path tracker and they kind of show you how is the bar path changing from rep to rep. That deviation from rep to rep, and like the way it shows you on your phone or on your screen, that line, that is the movement variability I'm referring to here. There's changes in center of mass management. Like one rep is on midfoot, one rep is a little bit further back, one rep is a little bit more forward, which I think that type of movement variability is fine. And I guess to just talk about one point before I move on, the movement variability that is the most quote unquote optimal for you, the one that you feel like you perform the best with and that feels the strongest, we'll call that the sweet spot. That is like do you want to give it like another
Yeah,
label?
yeah. I like calling it a sweet spot. It's like you hit your mark on something. It's groove would be
Mm-hmm.
something else that would come to mind whenever I think of that. Like you find your groove, you have your
You
groove.
feel locked in, you feel in groove, and it feels like technique is in the sweet spot.
Yeah,
We'll
and
just
I
say
wanted to say everyone's sweet spot is
different.
different.
Yeah.
Like and that's something I guess for as a coach to look for or as a lifter to look for as the load gets heavier. How do I self-organize under the bar?
Mm-hmm.
And is this a good thing or a bad thing, right? Because obviously you can have a sweet spot that's super comfortable for you, but you just kind of know that the end is near with it, right? For example, like as a coach and as a lifter, I've definitely seen my fair share of, for example, extremely rounded back conventional deadlifts. And as we've said before, there's only so much that you can really round your spine before the thing just quite does not work anymore.
Yeah, and
And that's a self-organization thing.
I think that will be actually like the second part of this, which is like the other bucket. But I guess like before we go into that, we'll just define this like sweet spot, then go into the variability we see on the like in the other type of variability, which is like what you mentioned. So we'll for an example for like that sweet spot, let's say, as far as like the center of mass management goes, for most people it's midfoot. Like you're squatting, the goal is to keep that bar over midfoot. Yes, some people will do better with the bar like a little bit closer to the toes. Some people will do better with the bar a little bit closer to the heels. But generally speaking, it's within that sweet spot. Like it's within midfoot. And the the main concept here with movement variability and like this movement option is the movement options that you do not use, you will eventually lose. So if you keep hitting that sweet spot at some point, you will not lose it. You will not forget how to squat. If at some reps you're a little bit closer to the toes, other reps you are a little bit closer to the heel, then you have some reps that are in that sweet spot on midfoot. You will not lose that movement option, and you'll be close enough to that movement option that you won't lose it. Which will bring us into the other bucket, and I defined it as more of obviously the other type will have an influence on your center of mass, like they're both connected, but the reason why the center of mass changes is not like a balance issue or a skill issue here. The other type would be the influence of your skeleton position, which is like your ribcage position, your shoulder blades position, your knees, how far you push your knees forward, how much you flex your back. All of these things will have an influence on center of mass, but we'll just pretend that center of mass, like the center of mass management skill is there, and now we have a different driver of that movement variability, which is how much do I extend my spine? How much do I flare my rib cage? So that is another type of movement variability because the reps don't look the same, but it's not because of a bar path thing. The reps don't look the same because your skeleton position is changing. So one the biggest difference between those two buckets is one goes in two directions, the other one only goes in one direction. What I mean by that, again, with the center of mass management example, that goes in both directions. Sometimes it goes to the right, sometimes it goes to the left. Right being, let's say, the forefoot, left being the heel. But it kind of goes in between those two, and you hit that mark at some point. With the other one, you've seen lifters with specific biases, like David mentioned. Some people like to deadlift with a flexed back, and there is a specific amount of back flexion that they perform really well with, and if they kind of deviate from that amount of back flexion, then they kind of lose that groove and they lose that sweet spot. They feel like they forgot how to lift, but the lift itself doesn't look that much different. It's still a flexed back, a rounded back deadlift, but the difference is it's too flexed or you've gone too far in that direction, and the problem with this type of variability, with that type of movement variability, is again you never see someone go completely opposite end of the spectrum, going from one rep is like a little bit flexed, then the next one is way more extended, then the next one is a complete round back, then like the following one is completely flat back, or even like with an arch in your back. You don't see that. You see just people, one rep is flexed, the next one is a little bit more flexed, next one may be a little bit more flexed, and there are some people who can maintain this amount of flexion, which is like they can maintain the sweet spot. So just to make a distinction here is everyone has their own biases. And the thing is with biases, sometimes those biases go too far and we start losing that movement option that is a sweet spot. So if you kind of keep drifting in that direction, eventually you will not have any reps that are in the sweet spot. None of these reps feel locked in. None of these reps feel in the groove because you've deviated so far in that direction. And I know we mentioned it in a podcast at some point that you need to do stuff in the other end of the spectrum. So you don't deviate. You don't like hinge everything. If you hinge everything, you lose the other end of the spectrum. Then eventually you're gonna get to a point where now the hinge is too far, and you lost your like sweet spot. You lost that movement option that produces the highest performance. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, it does actually. So, and what I was going to say to that is there's also like there's skeletal, but then there's also a muscular aspect to this. So if I keep buying into the extension pattern, I'm going to load those muscles, right? So I'm actually going to start overusing, right? Compensation is actually the word. I'm going to start, you know, compensating and using certain muscles too much. And what happens to that is you get bound to a very specific pattern that you have to hold to. And if that pattern isn't perfect because you've honed it in so specifically and you've overused certain muscles so specifically, what actually starts to happen is if you can't strike that exact thing on the spot, it feels off. And then that's what he's talking about is that once you lose that aspect, right, you lose the balance of it, you can only compensate so much into your own biased pattern.
Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't really say like it's. I mean, it's a strategy that people use to produce more force, but I guess like if you go way too far, then like it becomes more like a compensation. You start getting into different patterns, and I think we can also talk about compensations as far as like left to right, but that's another type of movement
Yeah.
variability, which I don't know if we want to go into. And I think it also plays into like the same. It's under the same bucket
Yep.
of the skeleton position is different, and if I bias more, I guess like a little bit more internal rotation on my right, the left one is like a little bit more externally rotated. It's fine to a certain extent. Like not all hip shifts are bad, but it gets to a point sometimes. Like it will get to a point where it's a little bit too far, and now it's outside of that zone that works really well for you. Um, so it's not as clear cut as all hip shifts are fine, and it's not as clear cut as all hip shifts are bad. It's more about, can you still produce force? Like that's the biggest driver here. Can you still produce force to make progress and not have any like fatigue problems from like left to right, or overuse specific muscles that will get more tense and more tense, and the more you overuse them, then they're gonna. It's more like it's like a non-ending cycle. You use this pattern, you overuse this pattern. These muscles are gonna be over, like they're gonna take most of the stress, most of the loading. They're gonna get more tense. Then you're gonna keep leaning into that specific pattern, because like if you're, let's say you're extended on your squats, and you with an extension pattern, let's say you use your lower back, your erectors a lot more, then they get more tense. Then you kind of get into more extension. Then you kind of use them again on the squat.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah,
but
and I mean it gets even deeper too, because like you maybe you have a particular pattern on a squat, and then you start bringing it over your deadlift, and then you've got a whole can of things there, because like if you're reorganizing yourself in many different ways on each one, then it gets kind of dicey, right?
and I guess to go from here, is it as simple as if you bias an extension pattern, let's say on the squat, you flare your ribs a little bit, maybe you arch your lower back a tiny bit, you see the pelvis kind of like you see like that butt wink to a certain extent, small amount. Is it as simple as just tuck your pelvis more, or don't extend as much, or is it more of a capacity thing that at some point you lose the capacity to get into enough flexion, or you lose the capacity to I guess like internally rotate or externally rotate, where like you kind of have to first regain that capacity, then you have the option to execute better and use that like that flexion or extension capacity in your technique, because like we said, there is the way I view movement, I think of movement more of as the capacity for you to execute at a specific level. If you have enough motion, you have the capacity to like execute the lift at a specific standard. Well, I guess we'll give an example. If you have the capacity to like arch your back or extend your rib cage, protract your rib cage, um, that's a movement capacity thing. And from there, if you have the capacity to have like a higher arch bench, it's more of a can you execute well enough? But you can't simply just have a super high arch bench if you don't have the initial capacity for it. So the way I view it is, does this person even have the capacity to brace better? Do they even have the capacity to load their left side more, or extend their back more, or flex their back more? Because like you lose those things as you load them more and more. You start losing the patterns or like the movement options that you do not use.
Yeah, I've been quoted saying it plenty of times. Like, there are patterns that are better than others, and like Anas said, it's there. What determines what a good pattern is versus a bad pattern is what is the outcome in the next X amount of time, right? From there, how much more can I butt wink? How much more can I before something happens, right? And there are some like literally like tall tale signs of like certain patterns that you just know aren't going to end better. I've talked about rounding the spine. I've talked about the hip shift to the left where you start rotating to the left. Rotating to the right is not as bad as rotating to the left. We've identified certain patterns that do have a pattern for decent success, and then we have some patterns that we have to be super careful with because there's a limiting factor somewhere that says once that one left hamstring or once that one piece decides it just is, it doesn't want to come out to play, or you decide you're going to skip your hamstring curls, or you decide you're going to skip something that's keeping that movement together, then you've got a problem. So
You're keeping that sweet spot or that movement option alive. You're keeping that, I guess, locked in. Technique feels good. Movement options alive by doing this other stuff, right?
dude, I've had so many people, especially the ones that I coach, they ask me why their accessories haven't changed. And the number one thing that I will tell them is, I like the way your main lift looks.
Yeah.
If I change that belt squat to a leg press, I mean, I made the mistake myself just because I wanted to try it. Like, it literally threw the whole thing in for a spin. Like if I decide, okay, I squat wide and I'm just really like, I love my ER. And then I just do like way too much IR stuff. If I do something that's off, right, I'm going to roll up and pretty much forget how to squat the following week. Like it's almost a guarantee with how much skill there is. So, and that's what this really comes down to, is how much skill do you really need to perform? And, I would probably have the opinion that the less skill you need, usually the better, but that's not really quite how high level lifting works. Usually if you have a high level of lifting, there is a good amount to above average amount of skill that you need in order to like even show up, like the minimums, right? So
Yeah, and I think from here we can give some examples. Did we define the main variables here? Because I do want to make it as I want to give the framework, the principles behind this, and like how I think these things work, and people can apply it whichever way. If they want to apply it through like to a flexion pattern or like an extension pattern, the idea is the same. But I think this kind of lays out the movement variability, I guess like the movement options and like how you lose them. If you kind of deviate too much from that movement option, you don't use it. Eventually, like you won't be able to like get into, like, let's say I guess like going back to the flexion versus extension, the person who flexes a lot on their deadlifts, if they've done that for an extended period of time, if you ask this person to do a flat back deadlift, they probably lost the capacity to actually do that.
Yeah,
So
it's
first,
going to be stuck on the ground.
yeah, so the first thing you have to do is, if you actually want to get that person closer to a more extended pattern, you want to create the capacity for that movement in the first place. So you might have to do some like, what is it called?
Hamstrings.
Sure. Or if we're talking about the spine, maybe like a prone press up or something that will drive some extension to kind of open up that movement option. Then this person has the capacity to do, quote unquote, a flat back deadlift, or like at least flat back in comparison to where he was. If he was like super round back, if it's like slightly more extended, that is going in the opposite direction. It's more about the like a continuum. You have like a continuum with these type of movement variabilities, which are like skeletal driven, I would say. They usually kind of just go like keep going in that one direction, especially also like if your squat looks like your deadlift.
Oh, yeah.
You're gonna keep going
It's
in
just
that
going to
one
keep
direction.
going that way.
Yeah. So hopefully that defines it, because I don't think it's as simple as, hey, just extend more, or hey, just don't shift to your right side, don't shift to your left side.
Yep.
Sometimes like you don't even have the required range, like joint range of motion, to get into that position, to access that technique or to access that movement option. You're gonna have to open up some space somewhere so you can actually go there. Does that make it clear enough, or can we
Yeah.
clarify it more?
I mean, the lifters, well, to clarify it more, really, the lifters that stay the healthiest are the ones that can do both. Like they can organize themselves in many multiple ways instead of using the same. I'm saying like organizing themselves only the same ways to do the same things. And it actually understanding movement, like it gives you like a different angle of, I guess, not really appreciation, but just like an extra second layer to like what SBD actually is. Like that's why SBD is the feats of strength. You have to be able to move both ways. Like that's why there's people that are really good at squatting and not so good at deadlifting. There's people that are really good at benching but not so good at deadlifting. It's because there's a self-organization at play that you almost have to fight against in order to be well-rounded and move truly good.
Yeah, because you have to go in and out of extension and flexion. Let's say you have to kind of be able to access both
Yep.
ends of the spectrum, especially for powerlifting. You can't just be like a baseball player who just like only uses one pattern, and like what the other arm does or what everything else does like doesn't really matter, because like they only use one pattern. Where with powerlifting, you do need a squat pattern, you do need a hinge pattern, you need to access some extension, some flexion, and I guess it depends on. I guess like there's, if you do sumo versus conventional, there's differences there, but the main idea is the same. And I guess like from here, we can go into some examples. I have like
Yep.
myself as an example. So the biggest thing I ran into, or one problem I usually deal with on squats that makes me feel like I forgot how to deadlift, is I feel as if I cannot brace anymore. That's I forgot how to squat. I just can't feel like I just can't brace. I unrack the bar. It feels like it's crushing my spine, and like there is no pressure created against the belt. Like, did I forget how to squat? I've been squatting for 10 years now, or over 10 years. I don't really forget how to brace or how to squat, and I know how bracing works. So bracing would be just making sure my head, rib cage, and pelvis are stacked over each other. But if I don't have the capacity to get into that position, I'm gonna feel as if I forgot how to squat. And with that being said, the reason why I get to a point where I forget how to brace or forget how to squat, everyone has like a different. Everyone has their own. I forgot how to lift. It could be anything. Maybe we'll go into some more examples, but that is one example. And the how the skeleton position influences technique at that point, and how it influences um, my my movement pattern, like how I feel like if I'm in groove or not in groove, is if with this, if I'm into a little bit too much anterior tilt, I cannot physically get my pelvis under me, under my rib cage, to create that pressure against the belt. Then I forgot how to brace, forgot how to squat, but it's not really me not knowing how to stack my pelvis under me. I know how to do that to some extent, but if I'm too extended and I cannot physically tuck my pelvis on the squat under load, I have to re-access that movement option somewhere else, not on a squat. Can it be done on a squat? Yes, but it's a lot more difficult because you have a lot of moving parts. I still have to set my shoulders. I still have to set the rack on the back on my back. I still have to set my feet and do everything else. And I'm in a low bar position, which is naturally even pushing me into more extension, pushing me more forward. And I'm trying to do something that is like the opposite motion, which is tucking, pushing the rib cage backwards, shifting my center mass a little bit back, which is kind of goes against the mechanics of the low bar squat. So an easier way would be to access or open up that option for my pelvis to move in that direction, and maybe kind of drop that tone of my lower back as a result. Because like if my lower back is tense and like it's pulling me in extension, it will be a lot more difficult for me to kind of access that movement option. So I have to open up that movement option outside of squatting, doing things like a rock back breathing, or like a frog position, or like a heel elevated goblet squat, that will allow me to get into this stacked position, this pelvis tucked position. So once that movement option is open, I know how to use this movement option. I have the skill for it, but I need access to it first. Then once that's there, my squat will be fine on its own, because I had years of experience. As long as my body is not fighting against me and trying to push me outside of this sweet spot, outside of this groove, then like that's when it becomes a problem.
Yeah, and when he has access to those things, those are pretty much what makes him feel strong. So like, and this is a point that we have to make with this is like, for example, if you have a beginner to intermediate lifter who can't access these things and they're just like, okay, I keep having trouble getting into position, or I keep losing this or that. For some of those lifters, for example, like if the low bar is really pushing you that far and you're having trouble like getting into that spot, I've even told some earlier lifters to just simply put the bar a little bit higher on their back.
Yeah.
And the whole thing, and the thing is that fixes the whole issue, because they can just find or get access to it real quick, or like tell them to move their hands out a little bit, or there's always ways to, I guess we'll call the word create space, but like there's ways around things. That's why we've always heard these words, these knees out, these random just things where it's like hands further out, point your toes out. That's probably one of the most common ones that I've heard, particularly for the squat, to create space. Whereas for his situation, he feels the strongest whenever it's narrow and with the toes pointed forward. So you're in a very specific situation that has to have specific variables checked off. But whenever those things are checked off, feels really good.
Yeah.
It's interesting because that, even though my squat is completely different, mine is similar in the fact that when I don't have certain things checked off, for me, I just lose balance. So like it's not even like I literally just get down in it and I run out of space because I'm already in a position where I'm well out of space.
Yeah. And I guess just to make it clear, I'm not saying that you have to squat completely neutral, like no extension or flexion. I'm just saying like I need to be closer to some a little bit of extension for me is good. Like I need some extension for my squat to feel strong.
Yep.
But once it's too much extension, then it's weak. And
Yep.
if it's like too flexed or too quote unquote neutral, that's not strong either. So we're not saying you have to be completely in the middle with all of these things. It's just you need to be close enough. If some extension is strong for you, cool. Just make sure you don't keep going in that direction. Then even though it's still extension, but there is too much extension where that does not produce as much force. You kind of want to. There's like a sweet spot of this much extension. I can produce this high of a force, but a little bit more extension, I produce less. A little bit less extension or flexion, I produce less too. But again, like with the nature of these things, you're gonna keep getting pulled in that one direction because like, oh man, like extension feels good. I wonder your body wants to kind of keep going in that direction, and like I wonder if a little bit more extension will feel better. Then you kind of keep headed, like you're just kind of headed in that one direction. Then at some point you're outside of that sweet spot. Hopefully, like that makes it clear. It's not no movement is bad.
Yeah,
Flexion or extension is not bad. It's just where is that sweet spot for you, and how do you maintain it?
yeah, it's like you have a cost for everything, right? We went over it. There's a cost for every position that you decide to assume, and then there are prerequisites that you just have to make in order to get there. If you have enough in the bank for it, then you're able to spend it. If you don't, you go into debt, and then certain muscles start chasing you for the money. Is long story short, right?
Mm-hmm. And I mean, we can go into like a little bit more about this, but it's the idea is, I guess, like there's like a general idea, and like we don't want to go into like too much in the details of, I guess, like the muscular lens and like how the muscles respond. You can think of it as the muscles, like the way Jamie likes to frame it. Jamie Smith is like, muscles are dumb. They just respond to skeleton position. Whichever position you put yourself into, the muscle who is well leveraged is going to do the job. And if you get into different positions, whether it's like from like a frontal plane or like a sagittal plane, specific muscles will be better leveraged, and they will be the ones responsible for producing force in that position. It's not like that you can force your quads to work if your knees are super extended. Like if your knees are extended, quads don't have leverage, they're not going to work, and it can work in like a right hip shift. Some muscles have more leverage, some muscles don't have as much leverage. Extension versus flexion, some muscles have more versus less. Which again, it's not good or bad. It's just we want to stay within this movement option, and like we don't want to lose it. So if you want to lose it, you have to go in the opposite direction at some point. Kind of like the midfoot, the heel to forefoot example.
Yep.
People kind of go into heel, midfoot, forefoot, and they're just going to go in between all of these. But if you want to maintain this extension pattern, like slight extension pattern, you can't just keep doing extension stuff. You have to do some flexion so you can go in the opposite direction.
Yep.
So you don't lose this like slight extension pattern, which feels good. Then yeah, like,
I mean, it's the same thing as like you can't go somewhere that you already are,
mm-hmm.
because then you start to get there, and then you're already there. So if you don't start going back the other way, you can't just keep getting there.
Yeah, you can't just keep going in one direction and think I can. Like you need to do both ends of the spectrum. Like you need to go in between them, so you don't lose either one, either option. But I guess we can go into some other examples. Did that example cover like how we got to that point of losing the ability to brace, forgetting how to squat that way, and how to address it? Was that clear?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I
think
thought
so.
it was pretty good. I think what would be helpful too is just to kind of go over, just some
Bench deadlift.
common. Yeah, we can go over some common squat patterns, some common bench patterns,
Yeah,
some
yeah.
common deadlift patterns, just to get everyone familiarized with kind of what we're talking about.
Okay, so the good thing with this, there is like two directions, so it should be fairly quick.
Yep.
So with squat, we talked about the like extension pattern. There's also like a flexion pattern, right?
Yep.
Some people like to, and a flexion pattern doesn't mean your like back completely flexed. Those are like the people who, if you think about extension and like what the hips are doing, extension pattern means people who like to kind of push their hips back a little bit. And there's like a certain amount of pushing the hips back that is good, but if you start pushing the hips too far back, then you're not squatting, you're deadlifting your squat. And you have people who like to kind of keep everything tucked and flexed. That doesn't mean they're going to round their back. Flexion as far as the pelvis goes and as far as like the knees go, you'll see the person kind of dropping their hips straight down, like shooting their knees forward, and yeah, like there's like basically it's just like a complete knee bend at that point, like a knee bend, and like you see like also like a center of mass shift with that.
Yep. And then you'll see it kick back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, Chance, if y'all have been watched Chance Mitchell from back in the day, that was his favorite thing to do. Dive right into the knees and then shoot right back and then swing back forward.
Yeah, but that would be like I guess like the flexion pattern, which
Yep.
which is a very squatty squat.
Yep.
And it's definitely, I would say, more productive for squats because it leans into the pattern that is like more textbook squat. But it's also, it can go too far. You see people, because you do need some hip internal rotation, which is associated with extension. But we don't have to go into like the biomechanics of it. But you do need that to hit depth.
Yeah.
So if you just like ER flex everything, you won't be able to hit depth. Like your hips will hit a spot where like they hit a wall. So that's when like I talked about it before, and I was like, yeah, like if you just need to do some hinge work, so your squat actually it looks better. And everyone's like, huh? What do you mean? I need to hinge my squat? I'm like, no, don't hinge
It's like,
your
no,
squat.
that's not what that means. Yeah.
Don't hinge your squat. I mean, you need your hips to be able to move in that direction, so they have the space whenever you're squatting for them to access depth, which can be a little confusing, but hopefully like that doesn't throw off people. So I guess like from there, like the way to address something like that, what would you do for someone who likes to flex and knee bend everything? They love that squatty squat, and like what would be like I guess like the solution? What is the opposite direction for that?
Yeah. We just need to train a little bit more extension, right? Hip extension.
Yeah, I mean, if it's depending on like which area is getting into, like if it's like more like lower back flexion, we can think of I guess like lower back extension or whichever structure is doing that motion. You can think, okay, I just need these structures to do the opposite motion, which is let's say like a hinge pattern, which will be more like hip flexion, lower back. Hip extension, lower back. Like the fuck. Now I lost it. You're basically doing let's say like a squatty pattern versus like a hinge pattern. The squatty pattern is more like flexed, and a hinge pattern is more extended. Okay, I got it there.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, for example, like Chance started doing a lot more hip extension type stuff, like, towards, before he disappeared, really. But he started doing more of that kind of stuff, and it really helped, like, all his lifts.
His deadlift,
Yeah,
just like he added like 10, and, like 100 pounds,
and all he did
deadlift.
was literally just add things that he was missing. Yeah. That's literally the final parts of his career. I won't say the end of it, really. Dude could come back at any given moment at this point. But it's like from the last that we seen from him, his training literally was training the things that he wasn't good at and then just getting incredibly good at them. And come to find out there's a movement aspect to that. So, I mean, it makes total sense.
Yeah, and we can go into other examples with I think with the squat, we have those two, and we have I guess like hip shifts like from right to left. I don't know if I want to go into that, but same concept. If you're loading too much into the right hip, just do stuff that loads the left hip. We'll keep it as simple as that.
Yep.
For we'll go into benching. What are some, I guess, like what are like the main structures involved, and what are like some biases or movement patterns we see there, or I guess like movement variability we see there. We can, I guess, like we can start from the top, which is, I mean, the bench press. I feel like it's a lot of it is like rib cage and scap driven. Like
Yep.
those like the main, like the biggest drivers.
Mm-hmm.
And like they have like the most demand, especially for someone who's trying to do like a high arch bench. There's a lot of demand on the shoulder, on the scaps and the rib cage. So
There's really only two main ones on the bench. If you're, and like he said, if you're really high arched and really trying to position yourself like real high like that, you've got an ER, facing one, and then you've got an IR facing one, right? Your elbows are either going to be tucking on the way down and you like driving through that position, or you're going to be shoulders down, elbows out, and just pushing in that IR position. So those are the two most common ones that I tend to see.
yeah, I mean, if we're talking about the elbows, we can also go into the like how the scap position changes. We'll just say there's also someone who loves to retract a lot, like overly retract, and someone who is like a bit more protracted. The retraction, I guess, is the most common.
Yep.
And like now we see a lot of like elbows out and like flared positions, and like rib cage is extended. So with that, the one that I've seen for me, for example, is like that goes along with like the extension pattern and like usually like how I like to lift heavy weights. I just like to be a little bit more extended. With that, I also bias like a little bit more shoulder retraction. Like my shoulders are like a bit, they want to go back, and the problem that arises from that is I actually cannot arch as high if my shoulders are super tense. Like if my scaps are super, they feel that they are super close to the spine, overly retracted, and like that kind of limits the arch, and it starts creating some problems with like soft elbows. The weight feels super heavy in my hand, and like I cannot really bring the bar all the way down because I don't have the space to for the shoulders to retract on the way down because they're already retracted. Like that starts to create some problems. So for that, it's a simple solution. If I bias a lot of retraction and I feel like a lot of tension in my rear delts, doing things that will, I think back in the day, I forgot like how many years ago, like every powerlifter was doing reaching stuff.
Yep.
Just like reach
Reach. Yep.
everything, which
people
makes
are
sense.
Still doing it to some extent. Yep.
But I think now we have a better understanding of
We do.
why and like when to actually apply these instead of just like throwing it at everyone hoping it sticks.
Yep. Reaching and internal rotation. Just spam it all, regardless of what the actual pattern is.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, like with that, if that is the direction I'm going in, and like I go too far, because like some obviously like I need some retraction, but if I go too far, and especially for me on bench, like I feel it more on like one side versus the other. But again, like it's not the point here. For that side that kind of goes too far, I just need that side to go in the opposite direction, and like sure, maybe do some reaching stuff there for the
For that side.
For that side. Any other patterns, like I guess, like for bench?
I mean, there's probably some more for like different kinds of benching. Maybe if you have like a close grip bench, or if you're, doing a more flat back situation, then there's obviously going to be more retraction needed on that end.
Yeah.
We saw a lot of that, I guess, maybe years ago, whenever big arches weren't always the thing. Big arches were seen as like the quote unquote technicians of the, they're technicians. That's what they used to call them. Right. So, the
funny thing with that is like now we see a lot more, I guess like patterns with like the bar tilts and
because of that.
because like we're pushing the like
End
the end
ranges.
range of motion,
Yep.
like the end ranges, and like whenever you try to reach that end range, if you lose a little bit
Yep.
of like the then like everything kind of starts to look a little funky.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that too, because I've had some lifters that are just a little bit taller and their arch really isn't that good, and yet they're trying to really, really drive this huge arch in this situation. And sometimes I just tell them, I'm like, hey, instead of trying to drive this end range, try just doing something more moderate, and it actually moves so much better.
Yeah.
Just because like that's not always just the way to do it. Like it's like, I mean, it's like anything. You see everyone starting to arch, you want to arch, and it's like, well, bro, if you're 6'7", or if you're not really built like a lot of the people doing this, it's going to be very hard to assume those same positions, and you almost have to find the stuff that works well for you.
Yeah, and I think just keeping that buffer for if you're trying to kind of use all you got, use like 100% of the range of motion that you have, then you're gonna start running into problems because like on some reps you might hit a wall and like
Yep.
you might see some other structure that's moving. Maybe like the shoulder will just completely tilt forward. You see some tilting of the scap
Yep.
where like okay, if you try to just stay with like the range of motion or like you have access to, things would have been a lot better. And I think also like that comes down like the relaxed back or like don't overly retract your shoulders. That became common like in the past couple of years, but also for someone who like is like far away from like their end range of motion and like they're not going to use that space like David mentioned, like a lower arch person, maybe someone who tucks the shoulders a little bit more. Try like fully retracting the shoulders is not bad at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you can't just take all of these cues and think they apply for everything. Some things do, like sure, like try to keep your center mass over midfoot or at least as close to it as possible. Even with that, there is some nuances where some people would prefer being like a little bit more toe or heel heavy, but yeah, most of the time there is like some nuances and like there's no one size fits all.
Yeah. Cautionary tale to anybody that wants to squat wide, bench wide, or deadlift wide. You're going to run into some of that stuff. I'm just saying. And if you decide to do all three at the same time, something's going to hurt. Like, I can't really, I just have to say it at this point. Like, I'm not. Like, I'm not going to say it's going to happen to everyone, but, like, I legit have not seen any case of somebody doing all three of those at the same time and not running into a compensatory issue or not running into a problem.
But we're trying to tell them how to avoid that,
Exactly.
which is
Yeah.
if you're trying to avoid these things,
Yeah.
you have to realize that all of these lifts use like a similar pattern or like they
Yes.
kind of go in one direction.
Yes.
So whether you have like some options where you do supplemental stuff, maybe like have your accessory work, and like at that point it's not like accessories, it's more like essential work that you need to do so you can actually maintain like a healthy movement pattern
Yeah.
that will go in the opposite direction. So you kind of have to, if you want to maintain these movement options, you can't just kind of keep going that direction. If your SBD stuff goes in both directions, cool, that's good. If they don't, then you have like there's more demand for you to kind of maintain these things through lifts that are not SBD, which is like whatever bodybuilding accessory work. So those have to be precise. Like you have to know how to prescribe these things. They can't be just random.
Yeah, leverage and movement go hand in hand. I mean, the thirst for leverage runs into the movement demands. And I mean, I've been quoted saying it before. It's like in a very ideal world, I would squat shoulder width apart, just a little bit of, maybe a 15-degree, like toes pointed out a little bit, and just, and not deadlift too wide, like maybe even like a narrow or, maybe even conventional. Just keep it nice and simple. Make sure my patterns are right. And we run into the problem with trying to maximize load. And that's really where why, we're able to even talk about this movement variability thing is because we're trying to like leverage things. At the end of the day, you're trying to lift the most weight, and you're saying, okay, I need to move better, right? We can't get everyone squatting shoulder width apart. Obviously, somebody's going to squat a little bit wider, and they'll add 50 to 70 more pounds in their squat, but at the cost of this one limiting factor that I always have to do in the background.
But you can manage it. Yeah,
That's
you
what
can
always
manage
happens.
it.
They like as you get more advanced, that's pretty much what happens. So like a good majority of us is we find patterns that work better than others, and then we're stuck with the fact that okay, now that I have this pattern, I have to do all this background work, or else the thing goes really bad really fast.
Or you can have your like actual squat, bench, deadlift be that I guess like what would you call it? Not
They're opposites of each other.
yeah, because like if you can keep your squat, like I'll say for my squat, if I can just keep it just like a little bit extended, not too extended, and like most of my reps are fairly like not too far in that direction, then like okay, I'm good, and like that's possible, but it's very difficult because like those biases, like they're fairly strong, especially like if you're lifting fairly heavy.
Yeah, there's a pattern.
Yeah, like you're gonna get pushed into that direction, so you're gonna have to fight against it when you have the capacity to do so.
Yeah. And I just wanted to say this. If you bench like more than 4 times a week and your bench is actually pretty good, like you're going to be fighting that on your squat and your deadlift. I'm just going to say it. Like you're extending so much so often, and you're compensating on one side of your rib cage so much so often that you're just going to be fighting that every single time. Like
My bench,
what it is.
my bench has ruined my squat progress. I think.
Yeah, I
Like,
can name so many
at least
people off the
limited.
top of my head.
But it's definitely like not it's not like the end of the world. It's actually fairly if you know what to do.
Yes.
And you want to put the effort in. It's fairly simple.
Yep.
But you just definitely I think hopefully this is helpful.
Yeah.
But I think like that covers bench. Let's go a little bit over some examples on deadlifts so we can wrap this out.
Yeah.
Okay, so for deadlift, what are your if we're talking about which one, sumo or conventional? Because like they're a little bit different.
I mean, we can just go over conventional.
Conventional is fairly simple, right?
Yep.
Because like you have like the more extended conventional,
Yep.
and you have like a little bit more.
The more common
flexed,
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, the very flexed one because, again, we're chasing that leverage. And usually to gain leverage on a conventional, getting your spine a little bit rounded makes it significantly easier off the floor.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's fairly like easy. If you like to flex a lot, doing some things like if your deadlift is very round back, that's more of like a squatty deadlift, and someone who extends a lot on the squat, that's more like a hingy squat. So if you flex a lot, we'll I guess like we'll shout out our boy Calvin. If you flex a lot, if you see Calvin, he squats everything. He likes to just like squat. I always tell him it's like, oh, like this is like your fourth squat day today. You're gonna squat your deadlift today too. So it's more of like a squatty thing, and like the thing he would do to kind of work on like the other end of the spectrum is like actual hinges or actually hinging his deadlift or RDLs. And like even if you look at those are a bit of a struggle because like the person is so used to flexing and the like moving the hips back in space like is very limited, and you can have to open up that space. So if you flex a lot on your deadlift, do some hinges, but not the main like the common mistake we see. Like people will start to bend their knees whenever they try to do their hinges, or like even like they would start to flex their back whenever they do their RDLs, which defeats the purpose at that point.
And that's the most common that's the most common thing that we see. We go on Instagram and everybody's RDLs are with 1 too much weight and 2 with a flex back, which is totally kind of defeats the purpose.
If
Now,
yeah, if that's the purpose,
yeah,
if
if
that's what
someone
you're using them for,
yeah, if someone comes up to me and says, "Hey, I'm just trying to flex my spine more,"
sure,
like,
go ahead.
go ahead, no big deal. You need to get your erectors a little stronger. Sure, let's do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, true hinges are definitely the best way. Actually, if you have a lot of flexion in your deadlift, like simply a stiff leg deadlift where you can like set everything nice and flat, like just feel your hips, feel those hamstrings pull right before you initiate it.
Mhm.
Don't use too much weight, so that you don't start to compensate by
Yeah.
flexing that spine. Probably the easiest thing you could do, I'd say.
And just a disclaimer, because most of these things are heavily execution driven. If you don't
Yes.
execute these things correctly, like you won't get much out
You
of
won't
them
get
because you're
anything.
doing the same pattern.
Yeah.
Like you're doing the same thing. You're still flexing your RDL. You're still
Yep.
squatting your RDL. Because like some people will come and say like, oh well, you said doing RDLs will help me with this, but you look at their RDLs, it doesn't look like an RDL. It doesn't look like a hinge. So um, with with opening up movement options and like creating these things, that is like a very execution heavy thing. And like if execution is not there, the result, like you won't see that result you're looking for. I guess like going over sumo a little bit here. What are some things we see? We do see like that
There's still
flexion.
a flexed
Yeah.
sumo.
Yeah, which is fine. I guess like flexion, we already talked about that. Other things we see, I guess like we also see like a super extended.
Yep.
Maybe also, I mean, with sumo, also like I've seen more like a lot
There's
like
actually a lot of variability I've
yeah,
seen
I've seen a
actually.
lot more like side to side stuff, or someone who can open up a lot more versus like someone who kind of closes off, maybe like a little bit more shins over the bar, a little bit more positive shin angle
Yep.
versus any of those you
Uh,
think you
I
want to go
mean,
over?
the two most common ones that I personally see, like aside from of course the flexion extension pattern, is there are people that love to drive their legs into the bar, and then there are people that like to open up to the bar. And for me, what I've noticed is they just fall into one of those two categories. They like to drive in, or they like to drive open, right? And that has a big deal to play with, of course, their rib cage, pelvis position, how far away they're standing from the bar. That's another big one that I like to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
But they're all just movement organizations. It's just what feels strong and then what gives me the most leverage.
Yeah.
Another common pattern I would say is a lot of people with shorter arms don't typically like to have that knees forward type of deadlift. That knees forward type of deadlift with a big swing, those tend to be the people that have longer arms or shorter torsos. Whereas the people with short arms, I've noticed a lot of them actually feel better whenever they can open up to the bar. So there is a little bit of a pattern that I guess I've been seeing. Obviously, it's not, something that's for sure, but it's just something that I keep seeing.
Yeah, and I guess with that, I mean, I don't know if we can put those into categories of one is more ER biased, one is more IR biased, or anything of that sort. But yeah, I mean, like if there isn't, I mean, I guess like I think like the concept has already been, I mean, driven. I think
Yep.
we've made it clear what the like how these things occur, how to hopefully address them. It can be actually very tedious
Yes.
because like these things are um, you're trying to do something that you're not comfortable doing. You're trying to do the opposite thing of what you're comfortable doing, which is very like it's a skill that's fairly, I wouldn't say difficult, but it's definitely, it can be like a little challenging to do something that you're uncomfortable doing. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think that covers like most of it. And just to make it clear, we're not talking about things you can fix with your technique like right away. Those things are more like there's a capacity component to it. If the capacity is not there, you can't just your way into like a more open deadlift position, or I guess get a higher arch just because you want to, just because you tried harder. You have to create the capacity, the capacity is there, then uh, then technique is more of a, I guess, like a variable you can play with. But movement first, technique after, I think is the way I look at it, because we need the capacity first. Then that's when I start looking into technique. But you can't force technique if the capacity is not there.
Yeah, biggest takeaway, just know your bias, know kind of on each lift kind of which directions you like to go. Always look ahead a little bit, kind of if I do plan on getting stronger, what's that going to look like? Is that feasible for me to do? Talk to your coach about that maybe if you have one. Hopefully you have one. And, assess it. Say, what do I really need to get stronger to keep this pattern going? Or what do I need to get better to maybe get out of this pattern because this isn't going to work when I add 100 pounds. And I'm 100% sure it won't work, right? So it's like, what do we need to do next? That's kind of like the point of this. We're revealing the fact that there are variabilities in it, but that there's something that needs to be gained, right, in order to keep moving better. If we lost it, we forgot how to lift, it's like, how do we continue? How do we get back to where is comfortable and where we can actually start building momentum? This is the fundamentals of building momentum. If you don't move good, you're not going to build any momentum. You're literally going to go back and forth. We call it a spin cycle. You're going to go back and forth between moving good and moving bad, and it's a mess. So
Yeah, and I think if you start feeling like you forget how to lift, then maybe looking into this might help, seeing uh, what biases do I have, how do I usually move, and am I actually going further in that direction? Also, recording from different angles that will reveal these biases will be very helpful. Because like for me, if I kept recording all my squats from like the front or like a 45-degree angle, I will never see how much extension am I getting into. Why am I not feeling my brace? Sometimes it's apparent. Like sometimes you can see it on video. Sometimes it gets a little bit harder to see, but it's worth the shot of, okay, I usually do. I usually like to squat this way, and there is like some correlation with the bar maybe feeling heavier in the back, or there's always like an explanation for this thing, with the shoulders, like with the bar not feeling heavy on the back. Maybe looking into, okay, what kind of position do I bias my rib cage to be in? What kind of position do I bias my pelvis to be in? Does that have an influence on how the bar sits on my back? And if yes, and I keep everything I do is going in one direction, maybe it's worth going into like the opposite direction. See if you start regaining that movement option that you perform better with, or at least the bar feels like a little bit lighter on your back. That will be like an indicator of this might be a good option. This might work.
yeah, and this is obviously a disclaimer too. We're not saying if you have a big extension pattern to just forego the extension pattern and just try and get dead in the center. We're just explaining that if you extend, you're probably just going to extend more.
Mm-hmm.
If you flex, you're only going to pretty much end up flexing more over time. We're simply saying if you have more movement variability, you can definitely get further because, again, you won't reach that limit or get somewhere that you already are.
Yeah, just because the nature of this type of movement variability, the nature of it is it keeps going in one direction. It's not like center of mass where you go in both directions. I think we mentioned that a couple of times just to make sure it sticks. It That's the main reason, at least I thought. I see those things. It's just because the nature of it is one directional. What's the word for that? Is there like a unidirectional, whatever?
Yeah, unilateral,
Unidirectional, yeah.
unidimensional.
Yeah. So like it goes in that one direction. So versus that's why like you kind of see that like if you extend, you're probably gonna start extending more and more. You're never gonna wake up one day and be like, oh, today is my flexion day. I'm gonna just flex my squat. It's not. Usually doesn't happen.
Yeah. Sometimes you'll get super lucky. Like you'll find a lifter who has like a wide deadlift, but then they squat narrow. So there's like almost like a saving grace to the situation. And because a lot of people actually do this like without realizing it. Like we're actually just revealing the things that are already happening in front of us. We're just kind of like we're actually verbalizing the observation. Like like there are people that will they will organize certain ways. They'll either try and do the same thing across everything, or they'll actually separate things because obviously there was too much fatigue, right? They'll roll up into a narrow squat and then they'll try and conventional deadlift and they're like, wow, I am flexing both times. That doesn't feel as good because, or they'll say, wow, I feel really good because flexing multiple times is really good, right? Like Calvin. So it's like, there's just a certain point where it's like, everyone's going to organize themselves a certain way, know your bias, know what's going to happen, and then we're simply saying that there are ways to keep a lot of things from going too far.
Yeah, I've rarely seen people who do both ends of the spectrum well.
Yeah, but well,
Yeah,
exactly.
I've seen a lot of. I started putting people into like you're a squatter, you're a like you're a hinger.
Yep.
Not saying that this person cannot, if the squatter that cannot hinge at all, it's just they can squat way better. Their hinge is not as well developed.
Yep.
There are probably some people who can do both really well, but usually like that's what I've seen the most. And I don't think this topic has been. I mean, we've seen it a lot online. I think where this lifter just forgot how to lift, or yeah, it just kind of happens, and there is no direct explanation to it. And yeah, I mean, it just clicked with me when I was like prepping. I was like, damn, like why can't I brace anymore? Like, do I really suck that bad? Like, is it 10 years is not enough for me to master or at least be efficient enough at this movement, at this squat? I'm like, oh, now I get it. This kind of explains it. And it makes sense to me. If it doesn't make sense to you guys, let us know if you have like a better explanation to it. Any closing thoughts, David?
No, I mean, if you have any questions about this movement variability, like feel free to just shoot us a message and we can maybe go into more depth with it with you guys. So,
well, yeah, I'll let David close it off again. David, go ahead. Close it off.
all
Super
right.
powerful close.
RP is bad. RP is dead.
RP is dead. RP is dead. Movement variability is alive.
Movement variability is alive. Move better.
All right. Well, this will be it for this episode, and we'll see you guys in a couple of weeks.
Yep.